It's often been said that rock and roll is all about talent and attitude. Well, the artist that we're going to talk about in this episode has gallons of both. She fronted a rock, new wave, punk band where she wrote most of the songs and played a mean guitar. And then she even had a kid with a kink. Yeah, attitude and talent to spare. Yep, we're talking about Chrissie Hynde and the Pretenders. Let's drop the needle. Chrissie Hynde grew up in Ohio and went to Kent State University, where she actually knew one of the students that got killed in the Kent State shooting. By 1973, she drops out of Kent State University and decides to move to England. And she gets a job for the music publication New Musical Express, but that doesn't last long. So she decides to go to France with the hopes of starting a band there. But that didn't really work out, so she finds herself back in the UK. Now, Chrissie was desperate to stay in the UK, so she actually asked two different members of the Sex Pistols to marry her so that she could get a visa so that she could stay. That didn't work out for her either. In the meantime, she was playing with a number of bands, but she knew that she really wanted to front her own band. So in 1978, she teams up with Peter Farndon on bass, James Honeyman Scott on guitar, vocals, and keyboard, Martin Chambers on drums and vocals. And they called the band the Pretenders. Ah, here comes the attitude. In 1979, the band releases their debut album called The Pretenders, and it includes a breakthrough smash hit with tons of attitude called Brass in Pocket. And then they also covered a Kinks song, Stop Your Sobbing, written by Ray Davies. Following the success of this album, naturally the record label wanted a follow-up album, but there was a problem. The band didn't have enough material. So they went out on tour and started writing material while they were on tour. It took them over 2 years before they could release their second album, which was called Pretenders 2. Chrissie wrote or co-wrote all but one of the songs. I Like the Adulteress, Bad Boys Get Spanked, Message of Love, Talk of the Town, Day After Day. I also like I Go to Sleep. This song was written by Ray Davies of the Kinks, but the Kinks never recorded it. So he gave it to Chrissie at the time because he and Chrissie were in a relationship which, besides the song, also produced a daughter. But things were not well inside the band. Farndon was heavily into drugs and was fired from the band. 2 days later, Honeyman Scott died of heart failure due to cocaine use. And then, less than a year later, Farndon died of a heroin overdose. So now the Pretenders were two, Chrissie and Martin Chambers. So they quickly recruited Billy Bremer from Rockpile and Tony Butler from Big Country and recorded Back on the Chain Gang. This was a smash hit in the US. So it was important that the Pretenders had a real band that they could tour with. So Hynde and Chambers then add Robbie McIntosh on guitar and Malcolm Foster on bass. The new group records an album called Learning to Crawl in 1984. The album is a big hit, reaching number 5 in the US. All the songs were written by Chrissie. Tracks include Middle of the Road, Back on the Chain Gang, My City Was Gone, and 2,000 Miles. The Pretenders played at the Live Aid concert, and it went down really well. But shortly thereafter, Chrissie is dissatisfied with Chambers playing, so she fires him. And this upsets Foster, who decides to leave as well. Again, the Pretenders are two, but this time it's Chrissie and McIntosh. So they decide to hire session musicians and record another album. As the tracks are just about finished, Chrissie hires two of the session guys, T.M. Stevens on bass and Blair Cunningham on drums, and they release Get Close. The album contains 2 hit singles, Don't Get Me Wrong and My Baby. With the success of the album, the band hits the road, but very quickly the wheels start coming off. Chrissie decides that the band was great in the studio, but they are not a live act. And so she fires the pianist and the bass player. Foster and Black are rehired to finish the tour. But at the end of the tour, McIntosh leaves the group. With all the talent and the attitude, the Pretenders just can't seem to hold themselves together as a band. So for the next album, called Pack, it's just Chrissie with session musicians. This is a habit which is continued on their next album, Last of the Independents. Again, Chrissie with a bunch of studio musicians. Tracks include Night in My Veins, Tequila, Rebel Rock Me, and a cover of Bob Dylan's Forever Young. Then there's a 5-year break until 1999, when Viva El Amor is released. Now, it's a little known fact that Chrissie was a good friend of Linda McCartney's. And in fact, Linda shot the photograph for the cover of this album. The album was a modest hit. Tracks include Popstar and Human, both successful singles, and Who's Who, Samurai, and Biker. In April of 1999, Chrissie hosted a memorial concert for her good friend Linda McCartney, who had passed away from breast cancer. By now, the Pretenders had kind of got it back together and settled once again as a group. With the release of Loose Screw, the band is Chrissie, Martin Chambers, Andy Hobson, and Adam Seymour. Loose Screw includes Lie to Me, Time, Kind of Nice, I Like It, and Clean Up Woman. The Pretenders continue to tour, but now it takes 6 years before they can get out their next album, which is called Break Up the Concrete. Now, Jim Keltner plays drums on this album because Chrissie once again fires Martin Chambers because she doesn't think he's playing good enough. But then when they have to go out to tour to support the album, she brings Chambers back on board. Ah, the drama. In 2015, Chrissie publishes an autobiography called Reckless, My Life as a Pretender. Now, I haven't had a chance to read it, but I'm sure it's a wild ride. The Pretenders were never in a hurry to record an album, so now it takes 8 years before we get to their 10th album, which is called Alone. And again, it's just Chrissie with session musicians. Then in 2020, the Pretenders released their 11th album called Hate for Sale, and it gets generally good reviews. I imagine that Chrissie Hynde and some grouping of a band called the Pretenders will continue to make great music and be reckless, as Chrissie says. Now, as I've done in the past, I've put some of these songs on Spotify on a playlist. So if you go to Spotify and do a search for Bernie Drops the Needle and look for episode 139, The Pretenders, you'll hear some of the songs that I've talked about. And since the Spotify search engine is flaky at best, here is the link, and I'll also put it down in the comments. Until then, hope you get to listen to Brass in Pocket and keep a rockin'. If you like this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.